Hi, my name is Crispina French, and promoting creative textile reuse is my jam. I'm an OG textile alchemist, worked my way through art school making ragamuffins from thrift store sweaters way back in the 1980s. That college side hustle grew into a full-fledged business, and here I am today to show you how to do it too. Stick around for all the things helping to navigate both the chaotic and dreamy chapters of building your profitable textile upcycling business. We'll talk material sourcing, business savvy, product development, marketing, and self-care. Gloss over the hard parts? Not here. Experience, lessons, and know-how. Deep dive into the struggles, wins, and rewards of running your sustainable textile upcycling business. Think of this as your favorite craft class mixed with environmental business school. Are you ready to be inspired, energized, and supported? This is the Rags to Riches Textile Upcycling Podcast. Today's episode of Rags to Riches Textile Upcycling Podcast is brought to you by Sideshow Clothing on Etsy and in person in Craryville, New York. Are you a burgeoning fashion icon who delights in your individual style? Maybe you have a penchant for really good clothing, a love of creative presentation, and respect for our life-giving planet. Or, if you are like me, you like to wear well-made clothing to handle your daily grind and stand up to the test of time. Sideshow Clothing has what you need. Vintage workwear, boots galore, jackets, dresses, ethnic and Western wear, the works. Mary curates this creamy collection of inventory, some dating back over 100 years, but mostly fashions from the 1970s through the 1990s. If you want to honor the quality of well-made clothing and stand out in the crowd, check out sideshowclothing.com, where you will find an anecdote to fast fashion and so much more. Hey, hello, friend. Welcome to episode number 7 of the Rags to Riches Textile Upcycling Podcast with me, Crispina French, your host. I'm an OG textile alchemist, entrepreneur, business coach, and podcast host. Today's guest is someone I met online through a mutual friend. She is an accomplished maker, stitcher, teacher, and author. Christi Johnson's embroidery is best known for rich symbolism and embellishment, breathing freshness into vintage treasures that she enriches with her art. Christi is a wealth of generosity, sharing her knowledge, experience, and skill. Her beautiful book called Mystical Stitches is a valuable teaching book and an album of eye candy rolled into one. So without further ado, let's go get with Christi. Christi Johnson, I'm so excited to introduce you to the audience here at Rags to Riches Textile Upcycling Podcast. Thank you so much for being here with me.
Yes, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I have to tell you, it's so funny. Christi has totally changed my life in so many ways, and I'm not even kidding. What is that she turned me on to this super cool little camera that enables me to teach online in a much more easy way. And she's also introduced me to this new platform that I'm using to record our conversation called Zencaster, which I like the Zen part of. And we were using a different platform before that was just not at all Zen. So thanks so much, Christi. It's such a pleasure.
Yes, absolutely. I love sharing any sort of tech discoveries because it's just, we could just waste so much time just trying to research everything and figure it out. It's like, I just want to get to the work.
Right? The fun part, right?
Yes.
That's so true. Oh my goodness. So, I first ran across you with your gorgeous book, which I have to say is one of my favorite, just inspirational embroidery books. And once I kind of started digging into that, I was realizing that your path has been a very kind of diverse and cool combination of textile upcycling and symbolism and spirituality. And I'd love to just have you share a little bit about how you got here from there.
Right. I mean, I've been working with textiles my whole life. But really for me, the movement into working with spirituality first came through living in Los Angeles and just working at a really corporate job. It was good at the time. I loved, what it provided for me, but it was really draining as well, sort of spiritually. And so I started getting more into meditation and just trying to kind of get off of the computer and get out of that sort of production space and get into a little bit more of a calm area mentally. And then as far as researching, delving a little bit deeper into things like symbolism and mythology and sort of like image-based concepts, that actually came from after living in LA, moving to New York City, and then moving to upstate New York, or upstate-ish. It's not totally upstate. It's kind of like side state New York. And then experiencing these sort of like really quiet, dark winters and realizing that is probably where a lot of the mythology and this sort of like this like underground mythology comes from, is those dark times of the year. And having grown up in Florida and living in LA, that had not been part of my experience necessarily. And I think having that background in meditation and having something to ground into to experience that, instead of it just feeling like this sort of chaos, there was something more to discover within that.
So, yeah. That is so beautiful. I love that. That it's interesting because, I'm in Massachusetts, so our right. climates and our seasons are quite similar. And, it's kind of funny how a lot of people who have had this cycle of the winter months being long and dark see it as something that's difficult and hard. Mm-hmm. And to have this insight into having that just inspire, symbolism and mythology and spirituality in a way that the kind of brightness of summer and the kind of, the lush falls and the, sparkling springs, it kind of, that makes it seem so lovely in a way that I hadn't considered before. And I actually love winter, and now I'm going to love it even more.
Oh, nice. Yeah. And I think it was especially like having that, being of so many climates where it just like, it never gets quiet, it never gets dark. It's just this like, it's almost overwhelming, and I think having that space, like anytime it would rain or be gloomy in LA, it was just like, it was almost a relief.
Yeah. To have that quiet space, right? Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. And it's funny, like I think about that a lot in the summertime. Even just in recording my podcast, like a lot of times there's like insect noise outdoors in the evenings, or, crickets or frogs, and in the wintertime, it's quiet. Yeah. It's just quiet. And there's just so much peace in that level of just, you can just get really introspective and kind of go places that might not be so attainable during the busier and noisier parts of the year.
Yeah, sometimes in the summertime I am like, oh my God, the crickets are so loud.
Yeah. If that's the worst of our problems, right?
I know. I'm like, it's really beautiful. Yeah. I can embrace that. But when I'm trying to go to sleep, I'm like, oh, I gotta be quiet. Could you guys turn down, please?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Hey, well, I'd love to share with our audience a little bit more about like your work and how you create the pieces that you work on, and just your whole, like your online presence, your mixed color .net website is just such a lovely kind of collage of all the places that you work and what you do in the world. Let's share a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, my work at this point is, very broad umbrella, I guess would be the best way to say. But I make different items. I work with vintage clothing and upcycled fabrics to make new clothes. I also make some tapestries, some embroideries. And then on top of the actual making of it, the other part is the teaching end of it. And so I like to, I like that kind of balance of constantly being inspired by having, by being able to explain my process and educate other people on how they can do their process. And that kind of sparks anytime I find a kind of a quietness in my own work, I can step into a little bit stronger into that teaching role and have that sort of balance there. And with the teaching, I teach embroidery workshops, and I also do a sort of intuitive garment design is what I call it, where it's like garment design that is not based on traditional pattern making. It's based on what I have developed by studying like even deeper traditional pattern making, like from ancient times, and looking at how clothes were cut and constructed in a way that is zero waste and in a way that doesn't require really complicated curves and seams. Because like as I'm making clothes at home, as much as it's nice to, you know, work with this perfect pattern and get these really fitted items, fitted clothes don't fit everybody. Yeah, just being able to be a little bit more free fitting in form, I'm able to not only accommodate a lot more different figures and sizes, but I'm also able to have a much easier time sewing it. And the clothes turn out much more neatly sewn because there's not all these weird curves and ripples.
And you're teaching people to empower themselves to build their wardrobes. Am I right?
Yes, definitely. And also I think when we try and learn sewing from the perspective of like, okay, use this pattern and sew this set-in sleeve, it can be really frustrating. And I'm a person who's been sewing my entire life, and I am frustrated by a set-in sleeve. So I'm just like, just forget about it. Like, don't even bother. Just try this whole different technique. Like it'll, you know, because when you are able to do something sort of in the early stages of learning something, that is so much more empowering, and it is so much, you know, when you don't have that frustration. I mean, there are always going to be frustrations in the learning process. But when you feel like you're capable early on, it can really encourage that growth and that sort of expansion of your own personal studies. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, in this time in our, you know, in the kind of human history, how there's so like, we're learning the acceptance of body type, of style, of gender. And it's so refreshing to have people in the world like yourself who are just really building that acceptance into what they offer. I think that's a really beautiful piece of what you are doing.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's really important too for me, is like making sure that nobody feels excluded in this, and that it's like, you know, clothes are for all of us, and we're not meant to feel like we're supposed to fit into something. Like we should be building the clothes to fit us, not like trying to sculpt ourselves to fit into the clothes or, you know, fit into some idea.
Sister. Oh my goodness. Amen. Oh my goodness. You know, I read a statistic the other day that was like, I think it's like 53% of the women in the United States wear a size 12 and up. And there are like 75% of the clothing brands that are, you know, in our culture create clothing for the 47% of people who wear a size 12 and down.
Right. Like, and it's arbitrary. The actual numbers of sizing are so arbitrary. And we've gone so far with these sort of like inconsistent sizings that it's like, you know, there's no going back at this point. I'm just like, you know, just scrap it and start over.
There's no standard. There is no standard, right? Like, yeah. And then so you're not only are you empowering people to create clothing that is for them, that brings them joy in the wearing process, but you're also creating a skill set that allows people to take that and build it into their creative process and their lives in a way that is just going to nurture and feed them goodness rather than shame for feeling like, you know, they're not the right body type or size. Super, super cool. The other thing I really love about your work is that there's this kind of like imagery that is, you know, specific to the person making it, or the person, you know, you use a lovely kind of combination of kind of whimsical and spiritual and, you know, meaningful symbolism that is kind of collaged into garments that are just, I mean, just looking on your website and seeing the, you know, I'm imagining that some of the pieces that you're working on are vintage, and then are some of those also constructed new pieces? How does that work?
Yeah, I usually will work with like different leftover pieces of fabric, or a lot of the fabric I have is like, I'll sometimes purchase new fabric because I want to naturally dye it. And I know if it's new or dead stock, you know, if it's like factory dead stock, I know it hasn't been stained in any way before. And that's what's going to work best for naturally dyed fabrics. So I'll get, it's like technically new to me, but yeah, like getting fabric from places like Swanson's or Fab Scrap, getting their dead stock fabrics and then naturally dyeing it. And because when I work with natural dyes, it's very experimental. So I'm not usually working with it in a way that I'm like, okay, I'm going to make this shirt. It's just like, I want to see what this flower does when I dye with it. So I'll just take, a half yard or a yard of fabric and dye it with that one plant. And then it just kind of usually goes on my shelf until I go, oh, I want to make a shirt. And so that's where a lot of the shirts in there are from that process of just playing around with plants, really.
That is so cool. So textile upcycling. So you're taking dead stock, which for anybody who's not aware, there material that is on a bowl and never been used, but maybe was created for, production of garments usually, or whatever fabric is created for. And then you are salvaging that is actually a waste product because it wasn't used by the company that ordered it initially. So you're taking that kind of pre-consumer waste and then you're manipulating it not only with your beautiful embroideries, but you're also naturally dyeing it. That's just so what a cool thing to incorporate into the whole process. Do you have like a garden with lots of dyeable plant matter, or how do you do that?
Yeah, I have been growing, like experimenting with different traditional dye plants just to see sort of what the growing process is for them, and seeing like, oh, let me see what this looks like, if I dye with this plant fresh versus if I dye with this plant dried, and being able to play with dyeing with it from different times of the year. So for example, like if I'm dyeing with mugwort, which is not, I don't actually grow that plant, it just grows here. I couldn't get rid of it if I tried. So dyeing with mugwort in the spring is going to give me a color that's much, much greener, at least in my experience. Whereas if I'm dyeing with it in the fall, I get more of a brown color. And then, playing around with other plants, like growing marigolds and black-eyed Susan, cosmos flowers, so all these different flowers. I'm also growing madder root, which is a bright red natural dye when you dig up the roots. And just playing around with like, how do these plants grow? I don't know why I always need to like go to the source of something when I'm creating something. I'm like, how is the material made? Except for weaving, that's one area I haven't touched, but everything else I'm like, but how are the dyes made? Where do they come from? So for example, black-eyed Susan is a plant where if you dye with the flowers, the Rudbeckia plant. If you dye with the flowers when they're fresh, you don't really get all of the color. But when you dye with the flowers when they are dried, the cell walls of the plant break down, and you're able to get these really beautiful green shades, which are a combination of the leaf. A combination of the petal and the center of the flower, because the petals are yellow and the center's blue, so it kind of combines to this green shade. But yeah, So just seeing how many different colors to get from one plant, and what makes a difference in the dyes and how.
Wow, that's really cool. And then, so you're, you dye the dead stock, but you're not dyeing the vintage garments that you used, mainly because you're not sure how they were treated prior. Is that right?
Yeah. With vintage garments, I generally, if I dye it with natural dyes, I'm going to do like a really like marble looking, like kind of all over tie dye. And the reason for that is if there are any sort of stains on a vintage garment, the stained areas will essentially act as like dye attractors. So if there's different, depending on if it's like a plant stain or a protein stain or anything, like sweat is going to bind to the dye a little bit more. So even if you've washed the garment and you've bleached it out, like there's still some residual sort of, experience that garment has. And so when you over dye it, I found that it brings out the color. So anywhere there's a stain, that stain is all of a sudden way darker than the rest of the fabric. So I kind of avoid dyeing vintage garments just because of that.
Yeah. I had a really funny experience years ago. I made a collection with men's dress shirts, and I bought, a bale. It was a few bales of white men's dress shirts. And it was kind of this hard thing to say because I sounded a little racist when I said that, but like their shirts are white, the guys can be any color, and so, here I am selling these things, and I'm like, I had, them dyed in many different colors to, it was a collection of women's clothing, dresses and little skirts. It was a really cute collection. And, I have a friend who has a commercial dye house, and I didn't know that where, people put that stuff on the ring around the collar stuff, the chemicals stayed in the shirt. So like, or some deodorant would react with a dye and it would be like bright purple, like under the arms or, around the necks. And it was, it was just something that I just didn't have any awareness of. So I totally know how that is. And I think that smart to use it in a way where you can kind of use the marbling effect to kind of enhance the finish that you're looking for while accommodating that kind of I can speak sometimes. The intricacies of like, the chemicals that are used, or that, if it's a stain or if there's like some kind of a stain removing chemical that's in there, the fabric still. And yeah, the vintage clothing is probably easiest to just use as is, and finding pieces that are the way you like them before, so you don't have to dye them over dye them.
Right, totally. And a lot of I love working with like vintage, like kind of like suit jackets, just because they're so well made. And it's like, I feel like suits nowadays, it's hard to find a really well made suit, or just blazer, I guess I should say, not a suit, not a whole suit. But yeah, so, and that's something where I'm like, it would be a questionable decision to try and dye a suit jacket. Just given all the internal structure on it. So like stuff like that, where I'm just like, you know what? I don't know what this is made of, and I don't want to find out by, by running it through the dye process. So
being like, ooh, this guy had a lot of stains on his jacket.
Yeah.
That's funny. But so when you're looking for your vintage pieces to embellish with your just amazing embroidery, you're probably just going, okay, nothing with stains. You have a specific thing that you're looking for that works well with the additions that you're putting to it.
And also like color. I'm so drawn to different colors. Like there's one of my favorite jackets that I embroidered. I just put a few snakes on it, but it's this like jade green color. And so anything that's like marigold, yellow, jade, like clay, like, I have these, I'm like very much drawn to specific colors. And then also making sure that if I'm going to embroider something, that it's a really high quality item. So making sure it's like linen, cotton, wool, or silk, any of those natural fibers, so that it will really show off the stitches better. I found that when you embroider onto synthetic fabrics, polyester, things like that, it doesn't make the fabric look any better.
Yeah. And, the other thing I think about those natural fibers and the pieces that you choose is that they're kind of statement pieces. They're going to last a long time. Yeah. You're spending your energy making them so beautiful. And, they're the quality of the embellishment matches the quality of the piece itself. So, you'll buy something that, might be a few $100s, and it'll last you for years. And you'll always remember the story of how that came into your life when you're wearing it, and just relishing all that quality and care.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's really important. Yeah, having those quality pieces.
Yeah. And, and the other thing I think about a lot just with the vintage clothing trade, like, in the years that I've been working with it, I've noticed a real shift toward the lesser quality, the fast fashion pieces that we all hear about, and to find and to kind of harvest the value that is intrinsic in those older and the natural fiber pieces is just, it's so nice to have the ability to find those pieces and then to just honor them with that second life.
Yeah, definitely. And, sometimes it's like if something does have some sort of wound on it of some sort, whether that's, a little tear or part of it's kind of coming apart, that embroidery becomes the perfect tool for mending it in a way that's really exciting and kind of really does bring a second life to it.
Today's episode of Rags to Riches podcast is brought to you by the Stitcherhood Recycling Society, my online membership community for creative textile upcycling, recycling, and reuse entrepreneurs. Inspiration, shared experience, tutorials, business savvy, and connection to a whole posse of people who understand the passion and intricacies of running an environmentally kind, creative textile upcycling biz. Daily posts, weekly stitch hours, book recommendations, group chats, member profiles, and strong connections is what you can expect when you join Stitcherhood. Head on over to stitcherhood.crispina.eco and sign up for a free 7-day trial to see if my Stitcherhood Recycling Society is a good fit for you and your textile upcycling business.
So, hey, Christi, I would love for you to share a little bit about how you got started and, what did you go to school? How did you get involved in your business?
Yeah, I studied fashion design in college, and I did the thing where I studied the fashion design and I went right into the fashion industry. I realized pretty quickly on in the fashion industry that I was like, oh, this isn't really what I want to do, but I couldn't figure out how to make a job out of what I did want to do. I just wanted to make stuff. And the thing about fashion is you're not actually making anything. You are, for the most part, telling other people how to make things. And it's very much it's a manufacturing industry. It's not, it is creative, definitely, but that is not the soul of the work that you do. The creative work is probably 20% of the work that we're doing in the fashion industry. So I, started doing that and was like, okay, I can't figure out how to get out of this without, and still have a job and still be employed, still make money somehow. So I eventually was like, okay, I want to start my own fashion company where I am actually making the pieces. So I started making my own clothes. I had was able to really conveniently got laid off with a severance, which is a really great way to start.
Perfect.
A really great way to kind of figure out how to do things on your own. Really beautifully sort of serendipitous journey that happened on. But so I started making my own clothes, and then I realized that I had just turned myself into the manufacturer. And through the process of making my own clothes, and this is when I had started this collection of clothing, I was also dyeing everything with natural dyes. With the dyeing everything with natural dyes, it came a lot of education that I needed to provide the stores that I was selling to. I wanted to make sure that they knew that, hey, if you have these pieces in the window, they're not, it's not going to fade immediately, but don't have it in the window for months at a time, and make sure that your customer knows to, when they're not wearing this item, to store it out of sunlight, and just different care instructions that I had to really work with the stores on. And luckily these were, sort of smaller boutiques who were really interested in learning how to care for and conserve natural dyes. But through that, a lot of the stores were like, oh, okay, well, while I'm learning all of this about the natural dyes, can you come and teach
how cool
dyes at the store? And so I was like, oh yeah, sure. Like, I love, I had taught before then, I had taught some, little crochet classes here and there and things like that. And so I was like, yeah, sure, I can totally teach. I love sharing information and I love educating people on these new skills and really like giving people what I've learned myself through practice and through experience. So that's kind of how I started teaching. And then I realized I was like, oh, I actually like teaching better. I like making the things. While I'm teaching, I'm still making. But I'm making.
That's cool. And so when you were, where did you go to fashion school?
Oh, I went to Otis College of Art and Design in Los Angeles.
Oh, cool. Oh, cool. So then you just kind of stuck around that area, got into the industry out there. And then through that experience, you were like, oh, okay, like, I think that I can make this suit me a little better, and wound up kind of becoming your own boss through that process.
Yeah, definitely. And
Cool.
understanding how the fashion industry worked, and kind of, I was like, okay, what can I take of this that I actually like, and what can I leave behind that we don't necessarily need to, that I don't necessarily need to work with? What seems extraneous to me, and what do I understand? Like I actually need, like we actually need stores. I felt like I really needed to work with those smaller boutiques, and I enjoyed that relationships. But then like something like a showroom, for instance, that felt extraneous to me in my position.
And probably, I would imagine that your production level would be, nicely met with just the boutique stores, and not having to go into a realm where, you're kind of opening yourself to, different types of purveyors who might not be so interested in helping to promote your process, your natural dyes, and your beautifully handmade things. That's so cool. And then you wound up, learning through that process that you really love to teach. That's such a cool thing.
Yeah.
And it's so funny, isn't it? How funny how like, oh, sometimes when things happen, like you get laid off or something that seems like this negative, right? It turns out to be like this giant blessing that you never could have like wished for.
Oh,
and it's
totally.
just like, right? It like changes your trajectory in a way that was like, oh my gosh, this is so much better. That's so cool. That's awesome. So if people want to learn more about what you're doing and maybe take a class with you or purchase one of your embroidery kits or just maybe one of your beautiful hand embroidered pieces, how can people catch up with you?
Yeah, you can check it all out on my website, mixedcollar.net. And that is basically where I have everything. All of my classes now at this point are online. I do occasionally teach live, but because I am in kind of an isolated area, I have to do a lot of traveling to teach. So it's just nice for me to be able to offer that all online. And doing different sorts of courses there. And yeah, that's basically where it. And my Instagram is at Christi J. That's ChristiJay. And that is where you can keep up with basically all the projects that I'm doing and any new information or any new courses that I'm releasing.
Cool. That sounds awesome. And again, the book is Mystical Stitches. It's a gorgeous piece of art in itself. And I just highly recommend that as well. And Christi, I just thank you so much for joining us today and for helping me figure out this recording platform and, being able to teach with that camera that you turned me on to. Thank you. It's just such a pleasure to connect with you and to share your goodness with our audience. So I wish you the best. I hope that our future continues to put us in each other's paths.
Yes, this has been so great. Thanks so much for inviting me onto your show, Crispina.
You're welcome. Talk to you soon. Hey, so I'm over here and I'm serving you a giant air hug because you just finished another episode of the Rags to Riches Textile Upcycling Podcast. Thank you for being with me. Our music is provided by The Lucky Five. Learn more about them at thelucky5.com. Our show is produced and edited by Vandal Hyacinth. If you want to dive in deep, head over to Rags to Riches Textile Upcycling Podcast.com.